I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to what's probably going to be a very fun and funny episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's really hard to sit in a room with Janette Ye and not have an amazing time. And so I'm excited for this next hour of recording. It's funny, Janette, when we first hopped on the call, I was immediately like, we need to actually remember that we are recording a podcast through this podcast recording because I think it's pretty easy for you and I just to shoot the shit for an hour and then we forget that there are thousands of other people in this conversation.
I know. It's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. So this is not the first time that we've had Janette on the podcast. Janette is, I'm going to use the word expert. I don't know if that's a word that you connect with, but as an athletic therapist, supports people in their postpartum life with rehabilitation from athletic perspective. Your whole mantra is around helping people return to their athletics and sport in a postpartum way or after postpartum. But also you have this, passion around C-section recovery specifically. So we're going to talk about a lot of things about postpartum life. And this episode is for you if you have birthed a baby in any shape or form, whether it was surgical birth with cesarean or a vaginal birth. There are pieces of this story that I want you to hear. So I don't want you to go, oh, I had my babies 15 years ago. This doesn't apply to me. Yeah. Yes, it does. I don't want you to think, oh, I had a relatively uncomplicated vaginal birth at home. This doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. There is a piece for all of you in this conversation, whether you're many years past your postpartum, because you're still postpartum, actually, always many years past your birth, or if you perceive that your birth experience was relatively untraumatic and hasn't been carried forward with you, we'd maybe beg to differ. And we're going to talk about that today. Did I sum that up well, Janette?
That was awesome. I would add one more piece. So if you're like, I'm tuning out because I'm not an athlete, Janette's an athletic therapist. She's talking about this for people who are active. We're about to tell you that if you have been pregnant for any amount of time, why you are an athlete. Okay. So don't tune out just because you don't identify as being an athlete. Okay, folks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I want to hear your perspective on that, Janette. And if you tuned into the last time we talked, we did talk about birth being the sort of the season-ending injury. And that's a great analogy that you make and why postpartum rehabilitation is such an important piece. But tell me about the pregnant athlete piece, draw that picture for us so that people can identify as or make those connections for themselves around why you say that.
Yes. So I'm not about to quote research and statistics to the best of, let's say, Jordan's ability, because she's so into all the research, etc. But what I will say, just for layman's terms and for us to understand, pregnancy is probably one of the toughest sports anybody can play. And I play competitive rugby for 12 years. Jordan competes in powerlifting at an international level. I can only speak for myself and say pregnancy was way harder than all my practices and all my games and tournaments combined. And here's the reason why. When one is pregnant, it's you are creating a new organ called a placenta. You're just building a new organ that's temporary, and then you're going to discard it. You're also growing a brand new human being. And that cost is not just a time thing, it is an energy thing. So for example, blood volume increases by 50%. So we walk around carrying how many liters of blood? Is it 6 liters? I don't even.
It's something like that.
Something like that. So by the end of your pregnancy, your heart is pumping 9 liters of blood through your entire body. So basically, even when you're asleep and quote unquote not doing much, you're doing cardio. Like you're doing cardio for 9 months with no halftime, right? So at no point in time, you're like, I just want to be unpregnant for like 20 minutes, have a sip of water, have some, some Gatorade, catch my breath. No. And there are no subs. So even if you get injured, too bad. You're just playing. You're playing through it. And here's the coolest part for our listeners who aren't thinking of them. If you're pregnant and you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm still not an athlete. Well, listen, you signed up for this sport knowing it's going to end in a mandatory injury. And we'll call that childbirth, because that's exactly what childbirth is. It doesn't matter that your body was naturally built for childbirth. The point that I'm trying to make, and I'm not, trying to fear monger here, is that there's a necessary period of convalescence, recovery, and rehabilitation for your body to participate back into a non-pregnant lifestyle. That includes very basic things like how you breathe, how you move, what your posture is, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And as you're saying all those things, I'm trying to reflect back on my pregnancy experiences. And I did play competitive sport while I was pregnant.
I know.
Especially with Charlie, my second pregnancy. I was curling competitively. And I remember feeling like death, right? Like death, like to
Oh man.
play sport on top of being pregnant. And I had never really thought about it in that way, right? And it's like, I was a healthcare practitioner at that time, right? I had all the knowledge at my fingertips, and yet I didn't give myself any grace for actually being pregnant. It's like, yeah, I'm manufacturing a human, but I'm also going to compete. And then I would be so hard on myself when it wasn't going well, or when I wasn't performing, or when I was more tired than my teammates. Like that, I didn't give myself any grace there at all. And I had all the knowledge, right? And yet the conversation, or the the culture of the way we think about pregnancy is just a thing that you just do, and not it just doesn't cost anything.
I love that you're also coming from an athlete perspective. You already self-identified with the term athlete prior to going into pregnancy. So there's this it's like a double athlete stack there, where you describe a mentality that, if you're an athlete and you're listening to this, you're like, yeah, I totally identify what Jordan is saying. The reason why someone competes or is able to compete at a high level, sure, you have a skill, you're physically skilled, but you must have that mental fortitude to push through pain, to push through fatigue, to ignore your body screaming out and like, I need to rest. And we call that a pro. It's a positive thing when we're a competitive athlete. But on the flip side of that coin, we are only stronger as athletes when we rest, not when we do. And that was the drive home message that I learned only after my second pregnancy, after my second vaginal delivery. I was like, okay, I actually don't have the option of not to rest now because of postpartum depression, because now I have 2 kids, because my second baby was born with a physical disability requiring my everyday focus on his needs. I was forced to rest. And that's the wisdom that I was able to take out of my 3 pregnancies, but 2 live births, my 2 live birth experiences.
And so and we talked about this in the last time we did this podcast, but that season-ending injury piece around birth, and then we send people home like, you basically have this massive injury, and then you leave the hospital with a newborn, or you leave that birth experience with a newborn. What in your opinion, like what's lacking from a postpartum care perspective that is creating such a gap for people to actually be able to take care of themselves and recover?
When I poll my Instagram peeps, and I love running these polls, I always like to think of myself as a researcher, Jordan. So when I read these polls on my Instagram stories, I'm like, oh, I wonder. So, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people will respond. And that's actually one of the questions. I go, what's the one biggest thing you wish you knew ahead of your cesarean birth specifically? Right? And any birth, but cesarean birth, because that is a surgical procedure. It is already bigger injury than a textbook vaginal birth. So we're comparing textbook vaginal birth to textbook cesarean birth. You're still minimum 6 weeks behind in terms of healing, minimum. So the most common response to the question, what's the one thing you wish you knew, is I wish I knew there was even such a thing as C-section recovery. Like no one told me. So, you know, that's triggering for a lot of people because it invokes feelings of anger. Why didn't my doctor tell me? Why didn't my mom tell me? Why didn't anybody tell me? Like, I'm not the first of my girlfriends to have a cesarean. Why didn't anyone tell me? That also can evoke feelings of shame. Like, oh yeah, I remember reading that 1 in 3 pregnancies result in a cesarean. Not 1 in 3 women, like 1 in 3 pregnancies. So if this is your 3rd pregnancy, there's like possibility that you're having a cesarean, that kind of idea. And just not, you know, maybe bringing more attention to the, it's a pretty high likelihood that a surgical birth is in the cards. So that feeling of shame of like, I didn't even read up on it. I wasn't even prepared. Janette has this like very simple 1-hour workshop I could have just done, and I didn't. So there are these feelings of you know, self-shame, and then all the way to anger, right? Anger, frustration, shame, sadness. You know, I really wanted a vaginal birth and I didn't. What's wrong with me? I did all the right things. I failed. You know, I'm an athlete. Why me? I don't deserve this. I worked out all my life. You know, my body was made for, you know, there's so many parts of that story. But the biggest thing is, I wish I even knew there was such a thing as postpartum rehab. I wish that I knew.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting, like when we think about, I'm always really cautious around language, especially when we've ascribed like goodness or badness to particular words, right? And I think even doing away with the conversation between like a natural birth and a cesarean birth is a really important aspect of this conversation, because it's implying that you chose the wrong door, right? And it's implying that it was a choice when, you know, that's not true, right? There in the vast majority of cases that do result in any kind of intervention being added to your birth, whether that's episiotomy or whether that's having to be, you know, like high fetal monitoring during your birth, or whether you were planning for a home birth and you had to be transitioned to a birthing center or a hospital, that there's this element of that was the failure, right?
Yes.
That this is supposed to be the most natural thing in the world, and yet for some reason I wasn't able to make that happen. And I think that's an important part of this conversation, actually, because, you know, and I don't even know where to start. Like, first of all, most women just used to die in childbirth. And so I think
I was just about to go there. Yes.
Like,
yes.
If the door that you choose is a door, or that a door that is assigned to you is a door that allows you to live, like, we're winning, right? Like, let's just start there, that this most natural process in the whole world for many, many, many generations resulted in infection and birth and hemorrhage and all sorts of things that are now not as common, still there. And I do think that's a whole other conversation. Like, global maternal death is still a massive issue, and we still need to talk about it. But the fact that you needed some kind of intervention in your birth is not this like failing of you as a human, because we're pretty darn happy that the option was there. So let's start with that.
Yes, the language does matter. You know, prior to just hopping on this recording, we were talking about, you know, in our language, in English, when there's no word to describe something that happens to so many of us. For example, the need for postpartum care. Like, if you're going to search on Google, what are you searching for? What are the keywords you're typing in? C-section rehab, C-section recovery, C-section therapist. Like, where do I go? Where do I go for C-section rehab? Who do I see for C-section rehab? Like, I call myself a perinatal therapist for no other reason other than the fact that I had to call myself something. I mean, let's face it, you're a naturopathic doctor. That really doesn't mean a whole lot to the average layperson, but there's a reason that you have that name. It's searchable. So someone can at least understand that I may need help with something I heard about this thing called naturopathic doctor, naturopathy, naturopath. I'm just going to search that and see what comes up. For the person who has birthed, what are you searching for? Birth healing, birth recovery, birth, I'm bleeding everywhere. How does it stop? I'm peeing everywhere. Is this, how do I stop? Like, what are you searching for? So all that to highlight what, I mean, at the very least in the last, I'd say 10 years, here in the province of Ontario, the Ontario Physiotherapists Association has done a really great job bringing to highlight to the masses that pelvic floor physiotherapy is a thing. It's been a thing for decades for so many of us healthcare providers, but no one's been able to really put a word on it. And so if there's no word to describe who you are, what you need, etc., you don't exist. It doesn't exist, not in this language. So that's the biggest thing I really want to bring attention to for all the listeners, is that nothing is wrong with you when you're like, you think you're doing your due diligence and you just couldn't find the answers. Well, the problem is more systemic than that. It starts with our language.
Yeah, you don't even know what question you're asking, actually.
You don't, yeah, I don't know. Right, exactly. And then if you take a step back from what you had just said, sometimes we don't even know what we don't know. So we're not even asking the damn question. You're not even looking for postpartum rehab because you don't know you need it. Or you think you did all you had to do when you were pregnant, but you didn't know. I don't know. Like, you know what stroller to the T your unborn child is going to need, and you put $1,600 down on your Up a Baby Vista, like I did, right? But you don't. But you didn't, but I didn't, and you did the financial budget on, like, I know I'm still pregnant, but I know daycares in Ontario up until last year cost an average of $12,000 per year per kid, right? So you're kind of doing your like financials on that, the budgeting, but no one ever said to you, well, your postpartum rehab is going to cost you around $2,000. And if you don't do it, the outcome of your chronic pain forever, again, not fear mongering, but the chronic pain, the chronic weakness, especially if you're returning back to sport, your chronic injuries that are resulting from the core that you never rehabilitated is going to be in the tens of thousands. Nobody talks about that.
No, you're right. And it's interesting. And I think, hopefully, and with, conversations like this and with I talk a lot about that perimenopause, menopause experience, right? And women will be really quick to be like, well, my mother didn't need that. And I'm like, yeah, but your life is not actually what hers is like, right?
Yeah. And maybe you never told you, maybe you never asked your mother. Remember the whole time you hated her? You think it was you because you're a teenager, just because she was going through menopause. She was actually going through perimenopause, and there's no such thing to describe it.
And I've said this before on other episodes where, my family will be like, well, you're, I don't even remember your Nana going through menopause. I'm like, yeah, she wasn't allowed to have menopause, right?
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't a thing. Women didn't have that. They didn't have the words to say, I don't feel myself. I think I'm depressed. These hot flashes are keeping me up, right? They didn't have that language to be able to get support. They didn't know and they didn't have Google either, but they didn't have that ability to even ask the question or have that language. Whereas now, when women have different dreams, they have dreams of sport. They have dreams of returning to work. They have dreams of having a different parenting relationship than previous generations. They imagine co-parenting with their partner versus bearing 99.9% of the parenting responsibilities. You have different dreams. And so your strategy has to be different than what we've done in the past. So looking back and saying, well, women for years and years didn't need pelvic floor physio. It's like, yep, they didn't deadlift either, right? They didn't dream of having a deadlift. They didn't dream of returning to running. So no, they didn't need that therapy, but you aren't them. You don't want to be them. We want to move forward with what it looks like to like this redefinition of what it looks like to be postpartum. If you want something different, we actually have to do it differently than they've done in previous generations.
That's very empowering, Jordan. I want Oh, this talk is so good. It's so good. I can see it in my mind. It's so good. The word choices that you're using there is something I would just love all pregnant and postpartum women to aspire to. Like, it's very, it's inspirational word choice. It is empowering word choice. It's taking an experience, a desire, taking the shame and the fear away from it, which is a daily inside job, by the way, everyone who's listening, and consciously, at the very least, using the words to say, I can, / I deserve, / I want, and going ahead and doing it. These are the word choices. I think if every day we just tried that on, I think a lot of magical things will happen. And it's starting with something as little as, like, and I shouldn't say as little, I should say as common as not, oh, I wish I didn't pee every time I ran across the street to catch the bus, to I am not peeing anytime I run, ever. Or even better yet, this is what I love from our colleague, Hannah Ross, who's one of Toronto's like great pelvic floor therapists. She once told me years ago, she goes, you know what, Janette? No one should ever pee when they don't want to. It's as simple as that. I'm like, yeah, like not, oh, I don't want to pee when I run. It's just like, I shouldn't pee. I'm not going to pee when I don't want to. Like, how aspiring is that for so many of us, whether we're one day postpartum to, like, my mom, 45 years postpartum is still experiencing this. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening. She didn't give me consent to share that.
I know. I share this story often about when my mom learned when she got her period and she thought she was dying because no one had ever talked to her about it. And I'm like, oh my God, if she ever listens to these episodes, she's just going to like die, right?
It's educational. It's helpful, Mom. Everybody is learning from your experience.
We're doing things differently. We're going to share. But I like what you're saying there, right? It's like, it's that more empowered discussion. And, you know, before we hit record, I was saying, I don't like how we treat that postpartum. It's almost like this mark in time where it is acceptable that your body no longer does things the way we desire. And it's become this, like, it's like this line in the sand, like, oh, I pee when I exercise, but it's because I've had kids, or my, abdominal wall has never been the same, but it's because I had kids, or this is how things look, and it's because I've had kids, rather than having this, more empowered conversation about it. It's like, I had kids, or I can't do this yet, but one day I will be able to. Or if I turn some focus towards this, I have the potential to change it. It's funny, I was just sick. I never did any pelvic floor physio after my birth. It was not a thing, when I had my kids, like, 13 and 11 years ago. And I just was really sick. I had a really terrible influenza. And by like about day 4 of my coughing, I was like, oh, my pelvic floor has given up, right? It's like, and I've never turned any attention towards that because it doesn't show up in my day-to-day life. But it was this good reminder. I was like, oh, this is actually an area that I did never address. And even though it doesn't really show up for me in my sport right now, maybe with the exception of a few, over 300-pound deadlifts, it is still an area that I could desire to change. And I have the mentality that I'm like, if I turned attention towards this, I probably could fix it. Versus it being a life sentence.
100%. And you can, with any, Jordan here trains with a coach because you need a plan, because you need daily inspiration, because you don't know everything. And this is Jordan Robertson, who is a professional in, as a naturopathic doctor, but she recognizes that she's not a professional in powerlifting. And even if you were, you'd still have a coach, right? So it is so, I always joke that, us therapists make the worst patients, right? And I can only say this for myself, is I had the exact same experience as you. I had this It's probably same cough that you did all through December. By day 4, same thing. I had incontinence for sure, and it lasted until, oh my gosh, weeks later. That also showed up last year in February when I returned for the first time in 8 years back to track training. Like I used to race a 5K distance. Like I was a competitive 5K runner. And when you run at those levels, like when you run with speed and you run with volume and you run with intention, when you cough, that's a 1 rep max. And for people who are like, what does that mean, right? It means you are contracting your muscles to it's the end of its capacity. So as strong of an ab contraction as you possibly can. And that's what coughing is when you're that sick. So for anyone who's done 1 rep max training, if you're lifting a weight for your heaviest lift, you do it once and then you rest for probably till the next workout. It's not even a workout thing. It's an intentional neurological load that challenges you on a physical and a mental capacity. And to take that focus, you might do it once. Well, when you're sick and you're doing a 1 rep max every other minute, Jordan, let's celebrate the fact that it took you to day 4 before you started peeing yourself. This is a win, folks. This is a win.
I think if you ask my husband, I probably coughed more than once every minute.
Right. Because / I didn't sleep. Why don't you stop bothering me?
That's right.
God, I read between the lines.
In the basement. Yeah.
Straight up read between the lines there. So, but then to take the analogy of the pelvic floor load, but then also postpartum response to that is, well, okay, so I stopped peeing myself. I must be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Jordan chose the sport of getting really, 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 really sick. So she 1 rep maxed her abdominal contractions, right? But she never trained for that. Now, should you train for being sick? No, but but the analogy here is that we train for the loads that we want to place upon our bodies. We don't hope for the best. Mm-hmm. So the outcome in this case happens to be incontinence, in this case, temporary incontinence. So that's great. But sometimes the outcome is an injury. For example, I hurt my lower back. For example, I can't lift without knee pain. For example, right? I can't run any faster than I do. And that comes from, not having a full rehabilitation after giving birth, vaginally or cesarean.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the abdominal wall there for a minute, because, one of the things I think that you do so well in your work and social media, and if you don't follow Janette, you will by the end of this episode, is demonstrate what things look like in that postpartum window, right? I think our generation is still really scarred by that. And here is such and such celebrity at day 1.5 postpartum with their 6-pack on the cover of People magazine, saying I can't believe it took me 6 hours to get back in my jeans. I think we're still scarred by that 100%. And what you do so well is demonstrating and showing what that healing progression and process looks like for women postpartum. But I think we underestimate how much, do we use the word trauma, has happened to that abdominal wall during pregnancy, and how, whether you have a vaginal or cesarean birth, what the long-standing implications of just pregnancy can be on the abdomen. What does that look like? Even just in again, that textbook pregnancy, what's happening?
So first I want to just acknowledge, we all bring our stories with us into uncharted territories, like the sport called pregnancy. And we do have these assumptions. You and I are children of the 70s. Oh, sorry, I'm a 70s baby. You're an 80s baby. Let's just be honest here. Let's not add years on. But we got to think about how women were represented in media at that time, creating our own ideas of what womanhood should look like. And it doesn't matter if it was realistic or not. That's what we carry with ourselves. During pregnancy, 2 things happen: physical load and mental load. I should say emotional load. And I speak of the emotional load first because that's honestly, who wasn't scared the first time they got pregnant? You may be excited, but you're scared of what is going to happen to my body? What is going to happen to my abdominals? What's going to happen to my vagina? Let's just be real here. right?
Mhm.
Because we have those ideas of what our bodies should look like, should feel like, should be presented as to the opposite sex. Uh, because of that's just what we learned in girlhood. It just was. So the first impact on our bodies with pregnancy is the emotional and psychological impact. It just is. Long before you even notice any physical changes, like visually, I should say. Internally, who wasn't tired AF the moment you found out you were pregnant, whether it's placebo or not? You get the 2 lines showing up, you're like, I feel like throwing up. Isn't that funny? I feel like throwing up every single day. I feel sick. So, but I wanted to really acknowledge the emotional load, number one. The physical load, number two. So I always say it takes 9 months for the body to slowly change. And even slowly is, understatement. It doesn't change that slowly. Changes every damn day. But it takes 9 months to make all these accommodations. Change of center of gravity, change in like how much blood you're carrying, like we talked about earlier on, right? All this kind of stuff. But it takes a nanosecond to be unpregnant. So the physical changes are massive, massive. You stretch into a way that you can never imagine and never get to again that quickly unless you have another pregnancy. And then literally after you give birth, as a non-pregnant, your body has to find its way back to a non-pregnant way of moving, non-pregnant way of holding itself. I call it the ABCs. So if anyone's just wondering, well, what does that checklist look like? Well, the A stands for your alignment, right? Your posture in whether you're sitting or standing or lying, etc. So A is alignment. B is breathing, something you do 12 times a minute, right? Did you know it's completely different when you're pregnant versus when you're not? And then C is core control. So people look at their own bodies after birth and like, who hasn't? They're like, oh my God, what's going to happen to my belly now? Is this going to be forever? Right? Let's just bring voice to this and say, friends, this is not a vanity thing. This is real talk. Say it out loud and let nobody shame you for having this worry. Let's talk about this. No, it's not going to be forever. And there's something you can do about it. And there's something you may want to do every single day. Micro changes, 5 minutes a day towards an outcome. So that's what it takes to recover from a major injury. Childbirth is a major sports injury. If you ever blown a disc, if you ever had a knee replacement, a hip replacement, a shoulder dislocation, you didn't get back to everyday living for weeks at best.
And we sent you home with exercises. We sent you home with exercises.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All of those things. You get sent home with a full rehabilitation program. Now, when you give birth, good luck, because you don't get a rehab program. No one mentions it, and you don't get to sleep, first of all. You don't get to sleep. Then you got to keep this brand new human being alive that you know nothing about. It's a major injury. You want to do some rehab for it. And if you can commit 5 minutes a day to it, you will have compounded interest on your investment from day one. It is actually not postpartum rehab. I always say it's not actually that complicated. It's not. You just gotta follow, a program.
Mm-hmm. It's been a secret. Like that's the hardest part about it is that you don't know where to find it.
No, it shouldn't be a secret.
Like this very like complicated thing, but it actually in itself is so simple.
It's simple.
And Janette, like when, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, because I think bodies are so adaptable, right? That like, even if people, I always love the term like not yet, right? That like most people can get somewhere else with their bodies in a strength, flexibility, mobility, and pain perspective if we put some intention towards it and if we have a dedicated plan to actually move in that direction. No, it never happens as fast as people would like it to happen, right? Like you don't like magically have biceps after, doing a exercise program for 6 weeks, unfortunately. But I like to think that we can move in a positive direction with strength, with, improving pain and whatnot almost always, if we have the right guidance there, like, is there you're too far past the postpartum window to actually be able to do something or change this?
There's never too late. There's never too late. I always say the body was made, like you said, it's made to adapt. I mean, my favorite example is my grandfather. He just turned 105 years old last week. And when he was in Toronto last, he was 101, I think. And he had decided at that point that he was getting too old to, walk outside in the winter. It may not be safe if he slipped. His words to me, right? So he goes, Janette, can you show me how to use the treadmill? 101 years old. He was born before like electricity was invented, I feel. Like, come on, guys, right? And he's like, I want to, right? I want to, A, so he had a goal. B, he asked for help. C, he wasn't afraid to learn something new. He got on a freaking treadmill. I was having a panic attack. Oh God, mom's going to kill me if grandpa falls off this treadmill. I'm supposed to be watching him, right? Yeah. And he learned, and then, or he practiced just a little bit every day. He practiced by like stepping onto a treadmill. And for a 101-year-old dude with no stairs, he lived in a condo, that first to step onto the treadmill required strength, required upper body strength for him to pull himself onto that treadmill, right? Then he had to figure out which buttons. He doesn't speak English and the treadmill's in English. Hey, you know what? He figured the damn thing out because he had me do a video for him and he followed the video because I explained it in Cantonese. Like, come on. Listen, if my 101-year-old grandpa can do that, what's stopping me from anything?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh my
It's
God.
never too late. It's never too late.
It's never too late. But I do think that there is that like, oh, I have a knee injury and therefore I can't do something, or my core has been affected by my birth or my pregnancy and now I'm never going to be able to. I'm like, honey, you're like 37, right? Like you got a lot of years left to go. Like, I think we can probably change this outcome again if we put some intention towards it and move towards it.
Yes.
But I did want to touch on just like that relationship with your core. And I had gone off on a huge rant about this before we hit record. And one of the things I think that you do so well, Janette, and I love having in my feed, right? So even though I am not pregnant, I don't work with pregnant people in my personal clinical practice, even though lots of my practitioners do. I didn't have a C-section. I'm not recovering from that. And yet there's something for me that's very positive about seeing the images of normal bodies experiencing healing, which is what you demonstrate so beautifully in your newsfeed. And I don't think I've always had like this very good relationship with my abdomen. And I think that lots of women probably have this experience where they don't think fondly of their core, right? It's always been this like, part of their body that maybe you have negative connotations with, maybe you don't have a good relationship with it, maybe even use negative words to describe your tummy. And yet so much of your work is about helping people reconnect with the muscles, the breathing, the healing of that part of their body. Like, what is that like working with that part of women and helping women overcome that mindset around their core?
Honestly, I think it comes right back to the first thing you mentioned today that we talked about is just giving it a voice and giving it words. You can't show me a single person who does not want to improve themselves in some capacity or do better or do more. And I'm talking from a philosophical standpoint, right? It absolutely applies to our bodies, our physical bodies after birthing too. The minute I find I validate a woman's feelings, the minute I tell her, you're not alone, the minute she then sees and then knows that she's not alone by, we're talking about my Instagram platform here, but like if that were the example, to literally see hundreds of other comments and be like, holy shit, I'm not the only one who has this alien popping out of my belly when I get up. I thought this diastasis thing is like here to stay. And I'm reading that, oh my gosh, so yours isn't, and you're 3 months ahead of me. So there's that visualization, that can be me. And then there's that inspiration. And I don't want to say hope, because hope is kind of like feeling a certain way, but not really taking action. I want to say like inspiration and that motivation, therefore, to be like, well, what did she do? Because she looks like me. Well, what did she do? Because she does the same sport I do. Well, what did she do? Because she's also a 4-time mom, and so am I. Well, what did she do? Because she was also a NICU mom. And I feel like I have no time and no emotional capacity because my baby is a preemie. Like, what did she do? And when we see that inspiration of the women ahead of us, and that there is a way, I think that empowerment is everything. I don't think it's any, and then it's like, and then I do the easy part, which is like, here's your program. Just follow it. Yeah, you want to book one-on-ones? Yeah, it's, I laugh about it because it actually is that simple. Like, but to be motivated and committed to doing it, the hard work isn't my job, the therapist. The work lies upon the mother. And if she can carve out 5 minutes a day for it and follow a program, and you can, you could do it on your own, you could do it one-on-one, you could join an actual program online. There's so many ways you can do it. But when you get committed to it and you see it through, the outcome, there's only one outcome, which is results. There is only one possible outcome. You will see results. And this is not a sales pitch. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. I have such a beautiful job where it's actually quite easy. I love making videos. People participate and engage and support one another so massively on my platforms. Truly, it's just, and I'm a vaginal birth mom. It's not even like I'm a cesarean birth mom. But to be able to hold space is it's so wonderful. That I'm so grateful for.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the other things I think that I love so much about what you do is that it is that focus on like strength and function. That's, and it's not about, I think, again, that the 70s and 80s babies and probably some 90s babies, the idea of postpartum rehabilitation is about aesthetics.
Oh, 100%.
Right? It's like, when can you get back to pre-pregnancy body jeans, which who's still wearing jeans? Like, that's what I want to know. Like,
I don't know.
I put jeans on the other day. I put jeans on the other day and I was like, why am I wearing these? But that's what we imagined, right? As being this postpartum recovery, is getting your body back to where it was. What if we actually just built stronger bodies? What if the goal was to have a stronger body coming out of that postpartum versus it being about an aesthetic of being postpartum? And I think that's one thing that I'm so grateful for in the work that you do and the images that you share and the women that you represent, is that it is about returning to sport, whatever we want to call that. And maybe it's just the sport of life, but it's returning to sport and returning to function like stronger than when you went into it. I think that's what that message, I think, is so important, because that's really what it's about. It's is embracing that side of it versus like the physique side. It's funny because I think we were talking a little bit before we hit record. I was joking with my coach last week about how I have the physique of a toilet paper roll, which you so beautifully went to think about the 6 rolls in the plastic. And you're like, yes. I'm thinking that I had like have a 6-pack, but no, I'm talking about the like brown cardboard circle that is in the middle of the toilet paper roll. That is my physique, right? Which postpartum, it probably looked exactly the same, but was not a strong toilet paper roll. Whereas, so much of my own personal journey has been around like, look, there ain't going to be no waste there. So it might as well be strong as fuck. Right. And making that the focus. And I think what attracts me to your work so much is that that's the focus, right? The focus is like strong, hard, capable, functional, body, right?
And also the educational piece of, can we reframe what the aesthetics tell us? So when I say that, I mean the aesthetics of a healing abdominal wall actually tell us if rehabilitation is going well or not, right? It can, do you still see a very matted down, tethered cesarean scar? Because if you do, can we work on that, please? So the aesthetics tell us what we need to do. So when you ask Janette, can we change this? I go, we can change this if A, this is causing you pain, and B, it's stuck down, because that's impacting how you move, how strong you're going to get. It may even impact your organs deeper, like your reproductive system, digestive system, urinary system. So yeah, so that's function-based. But I want to highlight that started with the aesthetic question. So I empower the moms to say, ask me about your abs. Janette, why don't I see my six pack? I love that you asked me. Did you start with a six pack? Well, yes, I did, Janette. Why don't I see one now? Let's talk about it. Is your diet different? No, it's not. Are you sleeping different? Yeah, it's kind of shit. Okay, well, let's talk about sleep. Okay, let's say the sleep is fine. Janette, why don't I'm back to Pilates 3 times a week. I do strength training, this and everything, but I only see, I don't see the definition. So to that, and I work with a lot of athletes. Did you know your deep core wasn't functioning the way it needed to? That's why you're getting a bowed out abdominal aesthetic, whereas the rest of your body is getting leaned and toned, right? So I don't want to say the aesthetics don't matter. I want to say that the aesthetics inform me as a therapist to identify what may still need to be done, especially if you're coming from, your normal is a six pack, or your normal happens to be strength. Your normal happens to be not peeing yourself. Your normal isn't pain every time you stand up because there's a C-section scar tethering you down. If that was never your normal, well, let's get you back there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can be part of the dream if that wasn't your normal before.
But then also part of the dream may be stronger than you've ever been too. So you couldn't possibly imagine or visualize being able to deadlift 300 pounds after having 2 babies if you never did that in the first place. So we might be able to take you even past where you started with. So there's another positive way of looking at it too.
I love this conversation, Janette, and it's really just expanded on what we've talked about the last time we connected on the podcast. But I like sort of broadening that sense of like, especially, that emotional component of that postpartum piece, because I think it's a massive identity crisis, right? Especially for women who identified as someone who took care of themselves before, or identified as an athlete before, who identified as, a health conscious person before. And then we throw them a, 200-hour-a-week job and an injury, and they, see this fleeting vision of their former selves that they, sometimes want to, put all those things, like you said, I want a sub, right? And like, it's time for like the sub mom, so I can step out and try and be that former version of myself. I think these are important pieces to tie in, because if you have the desire to change the physical, right, to move forward, be goal-oriented, have progression, you can't not deal with the other aspects of it, right? The identity part of it, the mindset part of it, the shame of feeling like you need support and you don't know anyone else who did. Well, you know what? They needed support too. They just didn't do it.
Or they didn't know how to ask for it.
Yeah, they didn't know the question.
That is the first question whenever we talk about postpartum rehabilitation in my cesarean birth programs. The first module is the psychology of C-section recovery. It has to be psychology first. For cesarean birth moms, when part of the rehab is scar massage, but you can't bring yourself to touch a part of your body because you're scared, ashamed, very upset about it, angry, all those things, guilty. We got to talk about that first. And that happens to vaginal birth moms as well. Like, don't get me wrong, but that is number one. That's what's going to move you forward, is we have to address the emotional health piece before we talk about the physical health.
Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I love being on the gram. This is where I hang out. This is my time suck. Ask Janette is my handle. I'm always there. Actually, I'm going to be there in a few moments. That's what I do. So I do Monday Instagram and TikTok lives for the reason that I believe quality perinatal healthcare should be accessible. So if there is a will, and if you have the internet and you've got something that looks like this, I'm waving my smartphone. Really, there should be no other barriers. So I do it. I imagine it being like my television show. I'm like this. So my TV show is on every Monday on Instagram and TikTok live at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
TV show, Janette.
That's my the Janette show.
Yeah.
That's my TV show. So I'm there. So you can find me there. And my website is JanetteYe.com. So my name.com. And you'll find all kinds of pregnancy and postpartum resources and a lot of cesarean birth resources there too.
Wonderful. And we'll put the links to all of those things in the show notes. So if you're listening and you need a quick hop over to Janette's resources, I highly recommend. And and even if it's similar, like if you're just in that postpartum window, however long that's been, there's still a lot of information that you can gain there around breathing and core stability and, exercise, but also just feeling heard, right? And seeing this tidal wave of women that are wanting to do the postpartum experience in a different way. And I just find that inspiring, right? That I love exercising with masters athletes, with women who, because they've come, these women have walked, right? They have walked millions of miles in a mother's shoes. And I love watching that and trying to absorb that inspiration from these other women who have gone through loss and divorce and, kids and pregnancy and injuries and work and all sorts of things. And yet they still manage to show up for themselves. So that's who you want to surround yourself with, right? Like that's the kind of person that gets you out of bed in the morning.
You just gave me tingles because this past week with my mindset coach, Adele Tevlin, she's been talking about the one mantra that's really resonated with me. And that's, I repeat to myself every day, I am the one for me. And what that means to me is it's not like my husband, the one I married is the one for me and he's going to make everything better. And it's not like my therapist is the one for me because she's going to take away my neck pain or like my hip pain, or my coach is the one for me because he's going to train me to be the fastest 5K runner. And all these things, are they're nice to have, but the person that matters the most for me is me. I'm the one that's going to make the most change for me. And to expect that from anybody else is actually unrealistic. So that's that. Those would be my parting words for any mom. And it's hard to hear, right? Because you're like, well, shit, you want me to spend time for me, but I have no time. And every time I want to, there's a screaming, crying baby and then a toddler. Mommy, mommy, mommy. I can't even take a shit without someone coming into the toilet with me. I'm going on a rant because this is my real life. But when you make the space for yourself in here, in your head, to know that the person for you is you and no one else, there's something so empowering from that. Because you wake up feeling every day like, yeah, man, today's gonna be good. Because I have decided I'm going to do X, Y, Z for me.
I love that. I love that mantra. It's funny, when we renovated our bathroom, this is about the not taking a shit by yourself story. When we renovated our bathroom, we put in like a pocket door, the one that slides. And our contractor was like, do you want a lock on this door? Because it's our ensuite. So it's like inside our bedroom, right? And he's like, do you want a lock on this door? And I'm like, oh, you think a lock is going to keep people out? Like, no, don't bother. I'm like, I didn't want the ugly looking lock on my bathroom door. And so I'm like, yeah, that lock, that's not keeping anybody out, by the way. And if it does keep them out, that doesn't keep the fingers from coming in underneath the door or a note being passed under the door. We have some chips. And so I'm like, don't bother. Don't put a lock. It's easier if they can just come in.
That's hilarious. I love that. Congratulations on the new toilet.
Thank you so much for spending time with me, Janette. I just appreciate our conversation so much. You have such a vital energy, and I wish that I had you in my postpartum window. I feel like it would have made a big difference in my life, which is why I'm so excited for our listeners to be able to to share that with you and be able to hear from your voice what you're so passionate about, but also to inspire them to be the one for them, because I think they all have that capacity. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. We're changing things in women's health. One episode, one topic, one conversation at a time. I want you to feel confident in your health. Please remember that the podcast does not constitute a medical relationship or medical advice. Please talk to your family doctor, your practitioner, your specialist, or anyone on your health team if you think some of the topics we discussed in today's episode apply to you. Take care of yourself. Until next time.